Michael Van Ronkel here for hotcars.com. I'm sitting in an Audi RS e-tron GT. This is the hardcore all-electric Taycan sibling based on the same architecture as Porsche's super aggressive, futuristic four-door EV. Let's get moving. I'm gonna head up onto the 210 freeway and then to the Angeles Crest. Let's punch it, but in the meantime, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. Now let's go full blast. I've got it set in dynamic mode, so the suspension should be taut. We should be riding a little lower. This thing has 637 horsepower and 612 pound-feet of torque. So getting onto the freeway is no problem, even though it weighs around 5,200 pounds. It does have four-wheel steering, but that's not really gonna affect us at these high speeds on the freeway. That's more for like parking lot navigation. It's a fairly long vehicle. It's got the skateboard battery layout, so the weight distribution is super low. Those little bumps, they don't feel too bad. It's a little louder than I was expecting, but overall, not too terrible. One of the problems that electric vehicle manufacturers deal with is that there's no sound of an engine to overcome the sound of a car driving, the suspension, the tires, the wind. But these luxury EVs, like the RS e-tron GT and the Taycan, have to make the ride quality as good as a nice S-Class Mercedes always seems to be the sort of industry standard. And this car costs $142,000 base. There is the lower spec, just e-tron GT, that's not RS, but it's got less power and, surprisingly, a little more range because it does have less power and you can't just punch it when you're getting on the freeway quite as hardcore. Like I said, the suspension is adaptive. You can go up and down with airbag suspension, and the shocks are adaptive. So even though it's a heavy car, you can turn pretty well. Now let's get to the interior here. The steering wheel is a nice flat bottom with Alcantara. Personally, I don't like Alcantara, but that's just my preference. I prefer just normal leather for the textural feel. That said, if you were to get onto the track with this thing and really hit it hard, it might be nice to have that little extra grip made possible by the semi-suede material. But there's carbon everywhere. You got carbon on the dash, carbon on the doors. You got the entire roof is made of carbon, which I really like. I'm a cyclist, carbon gets me going. And in all seriousness, the styling of the RS e-tron GT does it for me much more than a Taycan. They're both good looking cars, to be sure, but the e-tron just looks a little bit more futuristic in my conception of what the future will look like. It's a little more robotic, whereas the Taycan is a little swoopier with more like angular aero intakes. This is just harder lines and it looks a little bit more muscular from just about every angle. Here we go, we're gonna get a few minutes here on the Angeles Crest Highway. I'm driving this car courtesy of a loaner program in Pasadena. This studio called Out of Spec Studio just brought together a bunch of EVs for journalists to test drive. And I got into the RS e-tron GT first because it's the one I was most excited about, other than the Taycan, which they're not letting us drive because it's a German spec Taycan GTS Sport Turismo. Now the problem is, a car like this, if you're on the Angeles Crest, you're just gonna be going way too fast. There's something to be said for driving a slow car fast. This car is the opposite of slow. Audi claims it's a sub 3.5 second 0 to 60 time, and I can tell you, you lose track of speed really quickly because it is so smooth. But when you do get up here on the Angeles Crest, you've got really nicely bolstered seats. Everything feels perfect from the driver's perspective. You've got good visibility out the front, not so much in the rear if you can see it here in the camera. It's got that sort of squash sportback line that keeps the rear roof super low and is good for aero when it comes to EV range, but it keeps the visibility pretty tight out the back. And this isn't a hatchback like some other EVs that adopt that sort of overall aero profile. Here we're coming into a couple of corners, and even for a 5,200 pound car, which is about the same as my 2006 Porsche Cayenne Turbo, it's just cornering perfectly flat because of that low center of gravity and because of those adaptive suspension settings with the air ride and the dampers. And then you have, of course, the dual motor all-wheel drive. So coming into corners and going out, you've got great grip. You can punch it. The truth is that this car is going to be more of a commuter car for luxury customers, and the front seats nail it. They're super comfortable. They're great. I'm entirely stoked. The back seats, however, not as great. I've climbed in there and there's not a lot of legroom for me at about 6'1". Now, of course, Audi, Porsche, Lucid, everyone's competing to take over Tesla's dominance in the EV segment. This car is a direct competitor to the Model S. It's got much better styling, in my humble opinion. The interior build quality is far and away superior. I'm not hearing any creaks and rattles, which anytime I get into Tesla, it's like things seem like they're falling apart, even in brand new showroom cars that I'm getting from the dealer. But the RS e-tron GT and the Taycan do sort of give up a little bit to Tesla when it comes to range for the price. Again, this car at 140 grand and up, you know, you'd think it would have more than 230 miles range, despite using Porsche's 800 volt battery architecture that allows for pretty good charge times. And once you're spending that kind of money, you can get all up into a Tesla Model S Plaid, which is going to be also probably a little bit faster. But the thing with electric cars is we're at the point where speed doesn't even matter. It's about the ride experience. How smooth is it? How luxurious is it? How comfortable is it? How good is the interior design? Because they're all so fast that you can't take advantage of it. Once 0 to 60 is below 3.5 seconds, it's all a wash. Unless, you know, you're going to the drag strip, which if you're doing that in your EV is sort of like, okay, cool. I like the quiet turn signals, which is a nice touch and sort of a reminder that this car is electric and everything's very silent. It doesn't make quite the same sort of woo that I love about the Taycan. As a cyclist, when I'm up in the hills of Malibu on a weekend and all the Ferrari drivers and Lamborghini drivers and McLaren drivers are blasting my eardrums, redlining by me going 30 miles an hour, the Teslas come by and you can barely hear them. They've got a little whine, but not much. There we go. Full punch. Absolute insanity. There's just no reason for a commuter car to be that fast other than to show off the technology. And yet I love it. You gotta love it. It's a great car to drive. It's way out of my price range for anything I'd ever pay for. And the range isn't quite as good as I would want. Lucid just announced 500 miles of range for the Air. This car has less than half of that. That's kind of disappointing. Audi and Porsche and Volkswagen are gonna need to step it up and of course lower the price. The Air costs like $180,000 in the Dream Edition first versions that they're shipping. But can we get a car anytime soon that can drive anything close to this? It doesn't need to be nearly as fast. It just needs quicker charge times and it needs to be able to go over 300 miles, I'd say, for a city car. And once we get to 500 miles, then the death of the internal combustion engine is already well underway, if it isn't already. Now, I'm not feeling a ton of regen, so I'm gonna try these paddle shifters. And I can see the little charge thing on the dash here going up. I only have like 2 seconds to play with this car, so I didn't get a chance to really get used to it. But with my foot off the gas, it's not doing the regen thing like a Tesla or like a BMW i3, which will come to a complete stop with your foot off the gas. So it's not fully one pedal driving, but again, I may just not know how to do the settings because I only get this car for a half hour. I wanted to set up my cameras and give you guys a chance to check it out. The brakes, however, you can see them. I think they're like 15 inches. They are huge, they're gorgeous, they look good, and they do a really good job of bringing this big, heavy car to a stop. I don't see anything that says my remaining range. Oh, there it is. It's at the top here in a very small number. If this was my car, I would figure out some way to customize that that's the top, biggest, #1 front and center number available here. Maybe with the speed and the charge thing. And you don't really need the sort of analog reminiscent tachometers situation. I would just have numbers, but that's just the future in my opinion. Now, for a commuter car, the trunk also isn't that big. And that surprised me because a lot of these automakers that are transitioning to EVs are really advertising how much space there is on the interior because the motors are small and the batteries are low down. But the RS e-tron GT and the Taycan are very low riding cars with that svelte roofline, so you don't quite have as much usable space on the interior. That's kind of a letdown, but again, people buying this probably have an SUV for hauling the family when they need to, and they'll rarely have 4 or 5 people in the car at the same time. Now there's a good noise. Once I've got the regen going, it makes a nice noise as I come to a stop. But it doesn't come to a stop entirely with my foot off the gas, which I would want. I kind of like that when you're doing an EV. It's a reminder, I'm in an EV, I'm saving the world. Now, the eco-conscious part about buying one of these cars is, you know, you're making a statement that you want to have an electric car and you're paying a serious premium, but now the performance has gotten to where that premium almost makes sense. Again, $140,000 and up for this thing. What kind of other super sedan can you get? Probably like an Audi RS7 would be comparable. And that thing probably gets, you know, below 20 miles a gallon because it's got a big twin turbocharged V8 in there. In certain respects, the RS e-tron GT doesn't have a very big touchscreen here. I'm using the nav. I'm sure it's got Apple CarPlay and all of the good stuff because it's a $140,000 car. But you would expect something a little larger. I've seen a Hyundai that has basically one large screen, or at least it feels that way, from here all the way across your gauges and all the way across to the infotainment. So this is a little bit left behind in that department, which sort of surprised me. However, at the very least, we've got carbon fiber to look at. Another important factor for EV cars is heating and AC. The AC is blowing nice and cold. It's not terribly loud. You've got these large vents here, here, and here, and they work very well. They're not quite as intricately worked into the dash as on a Tesla, which I really preferred, but I've also driven a Tesla Model 3 in the hot Austin, Texas summer, and those vents simply could not keep the car cold enough for my comfort levels, especially when I was hauling some construction equipment, which is probably not what Elon Musk had in mind when he was designing the Tesla Model 3. Overall, I've driven all the Teslas, and this is a much nicer vehicle on the whole. The only one that might compare in my mind is the rear-wheel drive only Tesla Model 3, which was actually my favorite because it allowed you to get a little squirrely with all that instantaneously available torque and the low center of gravity. It had plenty of power, and of course, it's the cheapest, which is a major consideration for me. Well, I've got to go give this car back. I hope you enjoyed getting a chance to take a look and see me drive this Audi RS e-tron GT. I'm excited to have gotten a chance to get behind the wheel, and I'm also excited to see where Audi and Porsche can go from here. Can they come out with an affordable electric car with anywhere near this kind of drive quality, anywhere near this kind of performance, and anywhere near this kind of very attractive design? Fingers crossed. Thanks again for watching, and of course, before you go, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. It really helps us out. Thanks.